the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mitch, can we take roll call?
Bush,
Here.
Dunn,
Here.
Eichner,
Here.
Metcalf,
Here.
Skalvig,
Here.
Sullivan,
Here.
Seabroots.
Here.
Okay, this is a continuation of the meeting from Monday, December 13th. We left off in action items. We were debating number 1, which is the COVID protocols, and we will pick up exactly there where we left off. So, obviously, to summarize, Sarah had made a motion, and we had a second. We discussed for quite some time, and then voted. Motion failed 4-3. So, I guess now we open up discussion for any other suggestions, or whether we want to just continue.
I'd like
Plan as
to,
written.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the proposal that came out of a week ago Monday night's policy committee meeting, that we move forward with the matrix, with having the matrix that currently applies to the middle school and high school now apply to all grades, kindergarten and up, with the opportunity to revisit the matrix for our youngest learners below the age of 5 after the vaccine is available to them.
I second that motion.
Okay. So we have a motion to update the mass matrix to include grades K through 12 under using the middle school, high school transmission level and mask requirements per zone. And then we would, just to clarify, Joni, with 4K would be required to mask under.
Yes, so coming out of the policy meeting, we had said that 4K would continue with their current
Matrix, which
Matrix,
is
yes.
required masking for yellow and red zone.
yes, thank you.
Okay. Any discussion about that change?
So I would like to remind everyone here that matrix as it exists today was a compromise between folks who felt strongly about universal masking and about folks who did not want universal masking. The question has come up, when does it end? It ends when we get to the transmission level that is 200 times what has been deemed high transmission levels, I'm sorry, 2 times, 200% of high transmission levels. So there is a well-documented end in sight. We know based on last year's data that if we had used this matrix last year, we would have spent the majority of the second semester without masks on. We don't know what this virus will do at this point, but I, for one, am hopeful that we will see a similar pattern to last year and see numbers come down. But it does have a clearly defined point at which we can remove masks.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was thinking the same thing. We'd spent 2.5 hours less than 2 weeks ago. Nothing's improved in the meantime as far as transmission levels around here. I think we gave it. We had a great conversation that night. I was really proud of how we worked together as a board. And we came up with, I think, something that is sensible. And as I've been doing this, I don't know if now would be the appropriate time. I remember some of the things Mitch said, policy committee meetings, about this being a tool that he's been able to use that other districts actually don't have access to. Mitch, would you be able to kind of recreate what you said that evening for us?
Sure. I know that we've we've all come under fire about our matrix, about our protocols, about our plans, about all the testing we're doing. And when I've met with other area superintendents, the conversations have been around the point of, we wish we had your protocols because you're keeping more students in school. Some of the school districts are in the Grant County area. Those close contacts are quarantined for 14 days. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. You must stay home for 14 days. And when I'd said that we were testing to try to keep students in school, and any negative test allowed students to stay, some of the superintendents were really intrigued by that. One of the school districts, one of our local school districts, actually copied our protocols with permission and just changed it from Mineral Point to their school district name. And when these area schools have a positive and have a close contact, their current policies have been to quarantine either the classroom or large groups for that 10 to 14 days. We have not had to shut anybody down until almost the end of the first 9 weeks, where we had to start really keeping larger numbers at home. And again, other superintendents have called me, and one in particular asked specifically about the testing to stay in school, and really wanted to know more about that and how we were going about that. So my hat's off to you and the protocols that you put in place, because other districts would like to be able to use what we're using.
Can I make a comment, Johnny?
I just want to clarify, when you say other districts are having to quarantine, you are referring to quarantining outside of the school building and not having in-person access to their education.
That is correct.
Whereas in most cases, we have been able to continue to provide face-to-face education, even when somebody is deemed a close contact.
That is correct.
What I go back to is I'm not inherently opposed to treating the elementary school and the middle high the same. That's not my issue. I do have concerns personally with breakthrough infection and therefore treating vaccinated versus unvaccinated differently beyond what I proposed on Monday night. That was what I was speaking towards in the policy meeting. So I just have concerns that it's, kind of a token step that also isn't really addressing some of the things that we're talking about being concerned about in relaxing in other areas.
I think just to be clear, regardless of whether this motion passes or fails, you could address that concern in a separate proposed suggestion or fix, or we could just talk about that as a board, regardless of what happens with this motion, unless you feel like passing this matrix would somehow preclude any solution that you would like to see.
So this is not yours, Joni? What's in front of me right now?
This is not mine.
Because I am interested in, hearing additional options, because I think there has been some productive discussion. So that's how I feel about it.
I think regardless of how this vote on this specific matrix change goes, people can still propose all the other changes to the plan if so desired.
Even if the original one passes?
But I don't think Joni's motion was to pass the entire plan with the matrix. The proposal was,
Yeah, I was going to say
the
clarify.
proposal was to update the matrix.
My proposal is to update the existing plan so that there is no longer a distinction between the two buildings, with the exception of the 4K students. With the less restrictive high school, middle school policy being applied to all students.
But we could continue discussion thereafter.
This would be an amendment to I just want to make sure I think this would be an amendment to a policy if we did absolutely nothing. We did nothing at all. We just walked up and left. The policy we have would still be enforced. So we're just amending a policy. We're not passing the matrix. Matrix is already there. We're just amending something that's already been approved by the board.
Right. So we're passing an amendment to the current policy. So future amendments could be proposed theoretically. Is that your understanding of this motion, Mitch?
Yeah.
Yes. Any other comments or questions about it?
I guess I would like to hear more about this proposal. Because I think there's some benefit to testing to keep kids in school, but even if you're vaccinated, you can still spread COVID. You can still get positive, so I don't get what masks do for us. And that's just where I stand. I think it has an impact on the younger kids because kids use facial features to learn and all that stuff. And I think that needs to be taken into account.
Mhm.
So,
Anything else?
As far as the vaccinated, unvaccinated goes and treating them differently, they do spread it less if you're vaccinated. The period that you're contagious is shorter. So I think there are benefits to being vaccinated. We're seeing it in terms of people who are hospitalized and dying. If you look at numbers, the vaccines are actually effective, maybe not as effective as they were in the beginning. So I think it does make sense that people be treated differently, but fairly. I think it's fair. Yeah, that's just my opinion as well.
Yeah, I can certainly support the amendment as presented. This is the document I will present after, and that includes that amendment unless your intent for 4K was not to include them in the green.
I'm sorry, is it
So before the elementary in the green did not have to mask.
correct? Yes,
So you're good with the 4K.
not masking it
masking in
green.
the
Yes,
green.
yes,
Okay.
the 4K
So the
stays
yellow would be
on.
required,
Yes.
recommended for everybody else.
Yeah, so
Okay.
what my motion is meant to do is to move forward with what we talked about in the policy committee meeting a week ago Monday. And then if we want to talk beyond that, yes, I think we have a lot of other things we can talk about, but I feel like that is the first step and maybe the low hanging fruit that I believe this board can get to with like a fairly easy step forward.
Yeah. Shall we call the question and move on? Sound good?
Eisner,
Yes.
Janetka,
Yes.
Gelding,
yes.
Sullivan,
No.
Hibrud,
Yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Gunn,
Yes.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we amend the mitigation plan as presented, which includes the amendment just passed. The amendment is presented here.
Oh, okay. You want to
Which
talk through that a little bit?
Why? Yeah, but I probably need a second before we dig deep into it.
Okay.
Is that this one, Andy?
The marked up one.
I don't feel that I've studied it enough to give a second. I'm sorry. I need the conversation first. Maybe somebody
I
else.
mean,
has
if we
had
don't
more
need a
exposure.
second, that's fine. too.
I'll move the second for discussion.
Okay.
Okay, so what I tried to come up with was, as you all know, I've been struggling for weeks on some of the inequities and inconsistencies in the plan while still trying to keep a lot of the safeguards in place. So what is in here is essentially, all close contacts will be defined as less than 3 feet for 15 minutes or more in a 24-hour period, regardless of the masking situation. So we're not digging deep into whether we were masking properly, whether this or that. All asymptomatic close contacts, whether exposed in school or outside of school, will be required to wear a mask for 14 days or until a negative test at day 8 or later. So we would not be testing asymptomatic students. The updated protocols will include extracurriculars, so we don't have the inequity of a student being able to be with his peers or her peers for 7 hours and then excluded from the rest of these school activities. Contact tracing and quarantine protocols will remain the same for staff. And the matrix will apply to all grades except the yellow zone, which is what we required for forced masks required for 4K and strongly recommended, which is the amendment we just passed. The advantages I think in here are, again, I think it's a compromise without losing the safeguards. If we think about the recommended safeguards by the CDC, it's vaccination, masking, social distancing, hand washing, cohorting, when available or when able to, and it does not remove any of those things. What it does do is it eliminates required testing for asymptomatic students. It should, in theory, create less close contacts. The treatment of vaccinated and unvaccinated students will be the same. Curricular and extracurricular activities will be treated the same. There will be greater testing capacity for symptomatic students because we're doing less testing. And in theory, if you believe that the testing has increased the number of cases, in theory, mask requirements should relax as cases decline. And if you believe testing has created more cases, then by that thought process, if there's less testing, the belief then would be there would be less cases, and that's a greater opportunity for us to fall into the green or the yellow. I've tried to meld some concerns here along with and create some what I think are incredible concessions to some of the concerns we've heard about the inequities or the inconsistencies while not removing the safeguards for those who need them. We've heard from students. We're a student and we have some staff that need the safeguards we have in place. But addresses a lot of the other concerns that have come up and the concerns I had with it myself.
And Andy, you're maintaining the zip code count, correct?
Yeah.
And so if we're in the yellow, masks are recommended for everybody except for 4K.
They're required for 4K.
But everybody else recommended.
Just recommended. Yeah.
You want to talk about that last bullet point you left as well? Of household contacts. Being contacted.
Oh, yeah, household contacts fall into the same. So the household contacts would fall into the same treatment as an in-school contact, and we would still contact trace to the extent we need to let the families know that their son or daughter may have been, within 3 feet of a positive, so that they can continue to check symptoms and continue to monitor their students for a potential positive.
But we're also alleviating some of the email fatigue. Is that part of this here that we wouldn't be notifying everyone in the school of a close contact?
Yeah, so the households of close contacts be notified for each positive case. We wouldn't be, sending out mass emails for.
Right.
We would just be alerting those who truly, are affected by each positive. Not that we're all not affected by positives, but those who absolutely need to know.
Well, Andy, I respect what you're trying to do. However, I think one of your pieces of logic that if we test less, it will eliminate cases. It doesn't eliminate the case.
That's not my logic. That was addressing the people who believe that testing has created more cases.
Right, but we know that not to be true. Testing doesn't create cases. It alerts us of the cases. It's like saying your gas gauge on your car, when it reads empty, is making you gas tank it.
Yeah, I don't dispute any of that.
Okay, so I just don't. I understand, I don't understand making concessions, something we know not to be true.
I'm not making concessions for that. I'm not making concessions to those who believe that testing creates more positives.
I thought that's what, I must not be hearing you right, because I thought that's what I heard you say.
No, I said, for those that believe that also have a masking concern, it would then, in theory, be true. If that's creating it and we're doing less testing, then we should be closer to, for those whose masking is the main issue. Most of those people also believe that the testing has created more cases. I was
Andy,
addressing
are you
that
just trying to say that those people may be supportive of this plan because of their train of thought in that area?
Yes,
He's not saying he believes that. He's just saying that as far as, talking about people within the community that may have a differing opinion about masks or what have you, that they may look at this plan as a whole and be okay with this kind of compromise because they are able to deduce their own reasoning for why they would be able to support this. And it would be that kind of train of thought, not that Andy necessarily shares that belief or I do. I think he's just
So I
talking
guess
about compromise.
then if that's in our policy, my thought would be then we need to reduce the number of cases that we consider to increase us through yellow or red, because we would be knowingly allowing asymptomatic, maybe, people to stay in the school, infect other people, and spread it around.
It would have to almost be a whole different motion though, wouldn't it, to amend the matrix?
In what way, Gary?
If we're gonna change the numbers like he suggested, then that
The
would,
thresholds?
right, that would
Yes.
have to be a totally different motion.
Correct.
Okay, yep.
Unless we somehow suggested that if it seemed like the consensus of the board wanted to convince Andy to change the thresholds of the matrix in some way, he wanted to amend his motion, we could do that. Otherwise, we could discuss this, vote, and then if there's if someone wants to make a motion to change the matrix further or to change the threshold, that could be a separate motion.
I will say that I have gotten feedback that, a lot of people thought that counting cases within the school as I proposed on Monday made sense. So I don't have a problem with counting by zip code and maintaining what we have, with relaxing, a little bit of restrictions. I don't see a problem with it.
Masking is not an issue with me. I don't care if the masks are on. People just want their kids not to be tested religiously when
Right.
they have no symptoms.
Can I start with some questions, like just start on the first page? The first one is, and this is a question for anybody, but do we have the ability to define what a close contact is? Or is that up to this point, my understanding was that was coming from the health department. Can we tell the health department, we get that that's your definition, but we're going to use our, do we have the authority to do that, to define what we are going to call a close contact?
Yes.
We do. Okay.
Yes.
That was my first question.
I mean, we have the authority to take everything the health department, DHS, CDC has recommended and throw it out, which is what a lot of school districts have been doing. They've been taking what's recommended and saying, this doesn't work for us. So we're going to do something different,
Okay.
which I get, so yeah, I think, now, but if say, I think what you're getting at is in the mitigation plan on page 3, talks about non-classroom exposures. So let's say a community member tests positive, comes home and gives it to their children. And that's a community contact, right? Or let's say a student's parent or adult family member is positive in the house. That's a community close contact, right? So that's the health department's jurisdiction. It's not the school's jurisdiction. So the health department uses their definition of a close contact, which is 6 feet, 15 minutes in a 24-hour period, and that would stay the same.
So I'm sorry. Are we working with the school nurse to communicate with the health department when children call out sick with just symptoms that may be attributed to COVID? Are we doing that right now? Or how are we determining how those contacts are made? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm just a little, I'm a little concerned about, obviously it is, cold and flu season too. That I also don't want to overburden, Nurse Lindsay with being concerned about symptoms that she has to report to the health department that we may or may not know could be COVID without a positive test or, things of that nature.
Right, so I think the way it is currently working, the way it would work is if a child has symptoms that meet COVID criteria, and there's a sheet that's on the website that all parents have. So yeah, so if a kid has symptoms that meet COVID criteria, the nurse wants to swab for COVID to make sure it's not COVID, just to make sure it's something else, and the parent refuses testing, then the child would be treated as if it's a suspected positive. And I think suspected positives are reported to the health department.
Yep. My next question, and this is just kind of, I'm thinking through this, working through the thought process here. So I'm on page 2, I'm thinking about the 3 feet close contacts, and my question is particularly around, they can test after day 8, but if we're in the red and everybody has to be wearing masks anyway because prevalence is high in the community, that seems like the time when we most would want people to test, and that seems like there's no incentive at that point to test, because even if you test, you're not removing masks, and it feels like, why would anybody test then? But that's when we're having the most cases in the community, which feels like the time when we would most want to know, like, okay, what's going on? How are we doing? Are people okay? Again, I'm absorbing this and processing it here on the spot. So that phase anybody else? Like, there's no incentive to test because they can't take the masks off, and we're not requiring them to test.
I guess how I look at it,
Go on.
I was just gonna say is the current protocols in place and cases continue to skyrocket. So
Yeah. Yep.
That's how I feel about it too.
But we don't think they're spreading at school. We can only control what's happening at school. We don't think it's spreading much.
We've been told in emails that it was spreading in school.
I think it does, but I think if everyone would be mad, in most of those instances, I think there have been people who've been not wearing their mask properly and things like that. I don't think there's a lot of spread in the school. I think it's minor compared to the spread in the community.
Next set of questions. How do we feel about, so imagine a world where we're no longer in red, we're in yellow or green now, and there's a positive case, and we do have some close contacts who are required to mask. We've had this conversation several times before. How do we feel at the varying school levels, elementary, middle school, high school, about having our ability to enforce masking on a small number of close contacts and ensure that they are reasonably well masked throughout the day? And I think we have our principals here. In my mind, it was easier at the elementary school to think about that because those kids are mostly with the same teacher all day. When you move to the middle school, it gets harder. At the high school, if you have a list of, hey, these are my current 15 kids, and I need to make sure that if one of them is in my classroom, they're masked, and I have to check that list every day. Just any thoughts around that? Do we think it's doable? Do you think it's doable?
If a kid is full contact and wear a mask, school and others are not properly wearing masks, or at all. I would agree it's easier at elementary because you have couple teachers. You have a concern about those individual kids and the information, I guess, we're kind of tacitly sharing and having them wear a mask, if that makes sense.
Mr. Austin, what do you think at the high school level? That sounds like the biggest logistical challenge with that.
That is a
What?
logistical challenge. I'll tell you that right now. They're very good at pulling them up because they know certain spots where they're going to see me stand in the hallway. And when I pop into a room, when I'm in a room, I'll tell you, those masks are up and they're great. I know teachers are not wanting to be a mask police person all the time. They're here to teach. They're not here to oversee a mask for 45 minutes. That's really hard on them because they don't want to be the bad guy. They want to be here. They want to teach. What they're here for, right? I would say it would be tough. I'm going to tell you, it's going to be tough.
That's true currently, though.
Right.
So
No,
right now,
yeah, I'm not saying it's not true. It is what it is right now. So I'm not.
let me ask you this, does each teacher take attendance regardless of what period it is?
You're supposed to, yes.
Okay.
I'm not doing that.
There is hourly
I mean,
attendance.
It's hard because you want to get into your lesson and stuff. So at times, and then you don't get to until, 20 minutes in when there's a small break or at the end of the hour because we're doing a lab right now. So we need to get through. We only got 45 minutes. So yes, they try to do it right away, but I can't guarantee it's getting done right away every single day because they're trying to get into their lesson. Oh, that helps.
Right now, they just need to make sure everybody is wearing their mask properly.
Correct.
This would be the
Right
next
now, they
step
just need to
where it
make
would
sure
be,
everybody's wearing their mask.
and students A, B, and C need to, but nobody else does.
Correct. If we were to get to that point where we
Right.
require it.
It's work.
It'd be awesome.
Just a question for Dr. Dunn, I guess. When one person's wearing a mask and they're in close contact, is that effective? Who's that more effective for, the kid or everyone else?
It's more effective for everyone else.
Okay, but it is a good practice too. Even if one person's wearing a mask.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So the mask is source control, right? So you're trying to prevent possibly infected droplets to be in the classroom for other kids to inhale. So if a close contact is more likely to have infection to spread even before they develop symptoms because they were exposed recently, right? So that's why you want the close contacts to be masked so that it's less likely that if they do become positive that the 4 or 5 people around them will also have picked it up before they know they're sick.
But on the flip side, those 12 and older, 75% are vaccinated.
True.
Yeah.
Which means what?
That's the greatest defense to spreading it.
True. It's not the only defense and it's not 100% foolproof defense. So again, we've talked about multi-layered approach to precautions, and vaccination is the number one precaution, number one most effective. Masking is number 2. Safe distancing, hand sanitizing, contact tracing. The more we do all of those, the more successful we're going to be at preventing an outbreak. So it's not that, oh, we're vaccinated so we can skip steps 2 through 5. That's not effective strategy. So if the more of the 5 steps we do, the more successful we're going to be. And that's why, put them all together.
I would like to say to Mr. Renwick's point of tipping the hand, if you will, as far as who close contacts and having to mask. While I can understand the sentiment, I think our children are already communicating a lot of that as is. I don't foresee this plan moving forward being a huge change in privacy as far as what our children know and share about who may or may not be positive.
And this is not, and just to be clear, it's not new. We just have been in the red for so long it hasn't come up. This is the protocol that our vaccinated students followed since we put it into place. It just has never come up because everybody's been masking since week 2.
The other piece I would throw in there is the athletics and co-curricular, extracurricular kinds of things. So you could test on day 8 and not have to wear a mask in practice now, or not have to wear a mask in competition or at music rehearsal or for the musical. So come back to that question is, there is no incentive. Yeah, there's no incentive for 100% of the students, but anybody that's involved in co-curricular or extracurricular, there would be some incentive to come and have that test done. So then day 8, okay, now I don't have to wear this in practice.
So what if, Andy, what if that section, so again, I'm on page 2, looking at the box where the not crossed out box of the chart there, the 3 feet or greater close contact. What if that had matrix applied to it and it said, if we're in the red and everybody's masking, you still have to do the testing. But if we're in yellow or green, when masking is optional, to remove your mask, you can test out. Is that something you'd entertain, or is this what you're going with? And that's fine. I'm processing
it's
on the fly here.
Would you prefer, the thought process was 3 additional days of masking. 3 additional days of the added layer of protection. If you would rather have the test on day 5, so we're testing sooner.
It's not about the day. And for me, it's about having no incentive to test. Therefore, nobody, without an incentive, I don't think anybody will voluntarily test at a time when our cases are highest. That's when we're red, that's when I would like them to be testing.
Which I
to keep the most
understand, but
aware.
that's the world the vaccinated student lives in right now. And we have Omicron coming, which is hitting all students. Out east it is anyway. 900 cases on in a university with 97% vaccination rate. So that's part of it is those vaccinated students are living in no incentive to test to find out if they're actually positive right now.
And we've talked before, are we still at the state where we don't believe that we should force vaccinated students to test? Because I think that's one of the things when we've talked about trying to create consistency, we don't think we should have to ask kids who are vaccinated to test. Well, then in order to be consistent, we can't ask kids who are not vaccinated to test. It's the catch-22. We keep chasing our tail on
I'll go
this.
back to last July when Dr. Fox told us if athletes get vaccinated, they won't have to quarantine, we won't have to test. Okay, those are her words. So are we literally going to go back and say, we don't care what your words are, we're going to do it our way now?
No, but I think we can say we know more today than we did yesterday. We know more today than we did 6 months ago or 18 months ago. I believe that she was giving us what she believed was the best information available at the time. And there are things that I may say tonight that I will look back 6 months from now and say, I totally disagree with that. I think back to, I was the one who made the motion to take masks off in June or July, whenever that was. And I still agree that was the right motion because at the time, our cases were super low. In hindsight, I wish we would have passed a matrix that said, we're taking masks off, woohoo, but we're going to put them back on someday if we get that back to a certain level of transmission.
We're just hoping it wouldn't go back to that. So
I was very naive and thinking COVID's over. Oh, how I wish that was.
I don't
the
think you're
case.
alone in that, Joe.
So I think that we know more today than we did yesterday. And we make the best decisions we can with the information we have at the moment. Did I have? I think that was all the questions I jotted down when you were giving us the overview.
I have a question, Andy. You go to page, I believe it's 3, where the non-classroom exposures. I'm guessing that your intent is to relax some of the testing protocols for the students, but you had mentioned keeping the protocols for the staff the same, which would make sense to me because adults are more susceptible, and especially unvaccinated staff are probably the highest risk people in the whole building. So if you're going to keep, it looks like the vaccinated, unvaccinated protocols for staff would be the same at the top of the page. And I think at the bottom of the page where it talks about non-classroom exposures, I think if you want to stay consistent, then I think
To keep the words unvaccinated and staff.
So I think that the first paragraph that says asymptomatic and vaccinated students, it should say
Asymptomatic students.
asymptomatic students and vaccinated staff. And then the next one we should keep
We would keep that paragraph
for
for unvaccinated.
asymptomatic, unvaccinated staff. Does that make sense?
Take the students out of that line, right?
Yes, take the students out of the second line. So we'd be treating vaccinated, unvaccinated students the same, but we'd keep the discrepancy. We'd keep the difference for the staff, whether it be an exposure in school or at home. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so they're essentially the grid at the top
Would
would
apply,
just transfer to
would apply to
non-classroom
non-classroom
exposures.
exposures.
So, I mean, we could just change that to staff exposed in the classroom or not, or just staff exposures, if it's going to be the same for both, and then just keep the asymptomatic students section at the bottom. Unless you think we need to spell it out twice.
No.
If
I
we're-
just-
I'm just.
There is no difference, right? Am I reading this correctly?
Andy, can you help me understand if we're treating unvaccinated and vaccinated students the same, why are we doing differently with staff? I'm just trying to understand. I'm not saying I disagree or agree.
A little bit because, you know, the students are required to give education to. And a little bit that adults are more transmissible. They're more, you know, they shed more, and to have a close contact staff. I don't know that we have a ton of parents that would be comfortable with a close contact unvaccinated staff member in charge of 200 students without a negative test.
I was just, like I said, I just wanted to clarify.
And that, I struggled with that. I mean, that's a conversation I had with a few people.
But that last sentence helped me a lot. I guess my concern is still with the cases. If we are testing less, we will know about fewer cases. So if we know about fewer cases, the chance of us sliding back into yellow or green is greater. Yet our risk is just as high. So I would suggest that we move the case count numbers per 100,000 to be in line with the CDC recommendations rather than being twice the CDC. Because this whole thing is already a compromise over what the medical profession is telling us is the best way to go.
But again, I'm processing out loud here. So you're saying that by testing less, we could get comfortable with testing less if we moved down the threshold for the point at which we would be basically everybody wearing masks.
Or we make everybody mask yellow as well. Leave the numbers for there.
Well, if this motion fails, you certainly entertain that motion.
If Andy wants to make an amendment to it, he can make an amendment.
I think if we were throwing numbers out for school district cases, I could get behind that more, but we're still talking about community. We could have 0 school district cases and be in the red.
The students are also a component of the
I
community.
agree, which is why I kept it community-based.
I agree.
As we've talked about the CDC thresholds before, when you apply it to a population as small as the school, it's either green or red. You have a case and you're red. Any presence in the school and
In the school,
everybody's
right.
going to mask. So that's not a great situation.
Anyone have other questions or things to say about this proposal before we vote on it?
And I think it's a fair compromise. I appreciate Andy working it up. Doesn't give me everything I personally want, but I think it's a fair compromise.
Well, I think that's just it. It doesn't give anybody everything they want. But I attempted to keep some safeguards in place while addressing some concerns and start moving towards a greater sense of normalcy in hopes that we're getting there.
My concern is that it's false comfort. So we do move in the green or yellow. No one's wearing a mask, and all of a sudden we actually have to close the school because it's going around the school so much. Like I think Milton just had to close schools for several days. I saw in the news.
One of their buildings, yes.
So
Their vaccination status.
Rock County, I'm not on.
I don't remember if that was a middle or.
Yeah, I can't remember what.
Something. I don't think it was a high school. It might have been, I'm not just sure which one of the lower level buildings it was. So before you vote on that page 3, are you putting that paragraph back in for asymptomatic and unvaccinated staff? Are you leaving that in on page 3 under the non-classroom exposures?
I think what we came up with was changing the top grid to exposed staff.
You just leave it that.
The results of vaccinated and unvaccinated exposed staff are the same, whether it's in the classroom or at home.
Okay.
And then we would change the bottom to asymptomatic. We would cross out staff at the bottom where it currently says. And I guess I would leave it up to the board as well, what their thoughts are, since we're changing it to day 8 at the bottom. Should we change it to day 8 at the top part of the grid? For consistency. So that under vaccinated for, regardless of masks, day 5 would become day 8.
The first box, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the bullet point in the middle, Andy, is where you're crossing off students, just staff. In the middle of page 3, it's non-classroom exposure.
We probably would cross out staff. So that just addresses the non-classroom exposure for,
And you would remove
For
staff under the
students.
first, under the box.
under the box.
You would remove staff.
Here.
Then I guess the only other piece of discussion I would like, because I didn't include it in my motion, is January 3rd or January 17th.
We obviously get through the holidays and the current matrix then.
Yeah. And not through first semester, but the masking would be in place if we're not in the green or yellow, which would still provide the safeguards that I'd like to make sure are there through the end of the first semester.
You're proposing this change for the start of second semester or right when we come back?
I didn't put it in my motion.
Okay.
I think I'd be all right January 3rd if you want to keep masks on until the 17th. I don't care.
Here's
Well,
my,
if there's no,
Even if we're in
There's
the
no
green,
cases.
even if we're in the
Yeah.
green or yellow, keep masks on. I don't think too many people complain about that. At least they shouldn't.
Even if it's the 17th, if this passed, they would know there's a, this would be published. They'd know there's a finish line. I don't know. I don't know that there's any boost to do it on the 3rd versus do it on the 17th, although I don't know that there's any benefit in if we're doing this, does it matter if we wait an extra 2 weeks?
But I was thinking the 3rd, but
We have to wait. We have to have 2 weeks in order to come out of the red.
Correct.
I'm gonna be a week off.
You know, it seems cleaner to start it when everyone comes back on the 3rd, and we still have the thresholds in place in the matrix. And if this were to pass, you know, if we're still in the red, I think we would, you know, obviously the close contact protocols would be less strict.
right.
And there would be no testing to stay, but,
And by removing this testing, we're removing that tool that Mitch talked about earlier, the testing to stay.
So why would we administer? Would we administer any rapid response tests then? Would, if a 3rd grader has a runny nose or is coughing, we're just sending them home.
no, all symptomatic.
So we still would test, again, still.
Yeah, I don't think we're changing any protocols for symptom monitoring and testing. So
It's only truly asymptomatic. And who determines if a student's asymptomatic? Does the student determine that? Do they have to check in with the office? Do their parents have to sign off every morning to say, yes, I talked to Emily and this morning and Emily is not exhibiting any symptoms? Or do I just send her to school and somebody else does it? Or do I leave it up to her because she likes to be in school? I'd say, well, I have a little bit of a cough. I'm
I
fine.
think I could honestly say that's where we are right now. We have asked parents to monitor symptoms at home. I think we have parents, it's like, okay, it is kind of cold season, so, you know,
Or the change in weather,
Yeah,
swinging back and forth.
I'm sending my child to school, but then maybe at school, teachers might, well, you look pretty run down, you know, and you've kind of started to cough here a little bit. That might be the time where they might be sent to the office. We should call home and say, look, we think maybe there's some symptoms. Do we have permission to test? And do it that way, because that's kind of where we are right now as it is. We're asking families to do that symptom checking at home.
We did the exact same thing in our house last Thursday. We kept our daughter home because she didn't look good that day and I didn't want to send her to school. The next day she was fine, good to go.
yeah, I think the current practice is parents can report it, students can self-report it, teachers can report it. You know, really,
Yep.
as far as saying, hey, I think this kid looks sick or I'm feeling sick or.
Then we've got that checklist that
We got the
Was
system
used quite a
checklist,
bit
yeah,
early.
that the school nurse goes through and parents all have access to, and it's on the website. None of that would change. So,
And it does, I mean, just to clarify, it does still say in here, if you're symptomatic based on the screening and you choose not to get tested, you isolate for 10 days. The same as it has been since the fall. If a teacher identifies somebody with multiple things on the list. I know we had.
You have no appetite for amending the threshold numbers. Even 150% of what the CDC says.
I don't, because there's, a piece of it that's out of the control of the district.
I'd like if we could be in control of everything, but you can't, of course, or, have people act different ways everywhere. I'm concerned that we will too quickly get into the yellow or green. I'm concerned about the most vulnerable of our students. We heard from one last week. There are many others that are immunocompromised, that are struggling with a lot of things already. And I think this already being a compromise, to begin with, I didn't vote for this the first time. So for the policy the first time. I think it's just, for me, again, it's a compromise on top of a compromise. And one of the tenets is based on catering to people who believe testing causes positives, which we know is not the case. So I think it's just too many jumps for me. That's just my opinion. I feel I need to speak for those students. I believe we have a responsibility to the most vulnerable. And it's nice that most kids, and I'm very happy most kids don't get very, very happy. But there are some for whom rely on, the community masking up at school for them to be able to come. And I personally feel we owe it to them. And that's what makes me, I just think it's too many compromises for children's health, which I don't believe we should be compromising on at all. I know there's a balance.
And I will say, I consider that, and that's why all the other safeguards are in play. And we were also told in this room that the additional testing was not creating many cases, that the cases were coming from students who were getting tested. So we removed no safeguards except the asymptomatic testing, and we've been told those tests weren't producing any positives anyway.
But okay.
So I'm not dismissing.
I don't know if I'm feeling all the way there, but I'm feeling a little better about it.
That's why I support it, because it looks like it's drastic with all the X's, but it's really not. It visually looks drastic changes.
Can you read through under the first page 1, social distancing in school, at the bottom there, and then that first bullet point?
I think it needs to be cleaned up word-wise.
Okay, so students should avoid direct physical contact and maintain at least 3 feet of physical distance between other students. Students who are not close contact students who are not considered close contacts.
What that probably should say, Andy, is students who are less than 3 feet.
I think we can scratch out the are not considered close contacts.
Okay.
I see.
Right,
Okay.
so students should avoid direct physical contact, maintain at least 3. Students who are less than 3 feet from an infected student for a cumulative total of 15 minutes or more over 24-hour period, cross out the they, are considered a close contact.
Okay.
Or less than 3 feet. Okay, so that helps. Thank you.
So it might be best, Andy, I think, I don't want to create any, if this passes, I don't want to create any
On tomorrow's CBS Evening News, Steve Hartman on the road. You will allow a mother to pain of losing a child to Alexis spreading kindness in his name. That's tonight's CBS Evening News.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yeah.
Don't want to add more to it. I'm just wondering if the school itself has number of cases, but let's say the county or the zip code is not. That trigger anything, or we know it's
The school has a number of cases, but the community does not.
right. Let's say the
Yes.
community is like a 5, but we got 4. I mean, clearly it's in our.
After the early in the motion.
But we're in discussion.
Discussion, board only discussion, right?
I mean, I think admin input is welcome at any point as far as clarification questions. Unless, if the board wants to vote to proceed, but as far as I'm concerned, administration input is game at any point.
I mean, do we think we would have 4 cases without having a total of 6?
Well, I think this is just a clarification question, which basically is the matrix states that in a building, it has to be, it's a percent of the total
Yeah,
students.
that's what it was.
that are-
We had 4 in a building of 400.
Would be in the green. That would not be close to 10%. Correct? 4 out of 400?
But that's-
1%.
Yeah, that was my,
And that also, I mean, we need to change that to percent of students that have positive for those contacts. That is our protection for the built-in protection when we did this for per building. If we had a large number in a building. was
Yes.
Those numbers.
Yes, I think that makes sense to me that because there really won't be.
Because that's what that role was for.
It's a little bit semantics because it's kind of an in-school quarantine where people are masked and self-monitoring. But if you want to clarify it to just say positives and close contacts,
Like in first semester. In school quarantining.
but quarantine implies that they're a close contact. And I think your suggestion doesn't necessarily eliminate the quarantine, it maintains an in-school quarantine.
Would there be an appetite to make that range smaller, given that we're putting up some of the protections around proactive testing? So right now, in my mind, you're either in the red or out of the red. So it's 20%. So if 20% of the population is either positive or a close contact, that seems big. If we drop that down to 10, so 35 people per building. We have 35 people per building who are either positive or considered a close contact, and that move us to red, even if there's only 4 cases in the zip.
That's my only concern. How we have been. Those contacts.
We have been. My understanding is that has changed, right? We are no longer. We're taking a much finer approach to that, at least based on my household experience, where I had a child who was close contact and said, no, we went in and measured, and actually she's just outside the zone. So I think they're no longer saying classroom they're taking a finer look at that.
I think that depends on the classroom setting.
Okay.
You know, if one teacher has enough space and a small enough class where the teacher is able to space them out, then they can do that tracing. But if the teacher says, oh man, I had 30 kids here, or we did group sessions all day and they were all intermixed, then that throws it out. So it's kind of, I think it's a situation case by case basis. Does that make sense?
That does. And that means that 2 classrooms would put us in that range. Like if there were 2 classrooms, one positive case in 2 separate classrooms. I guess that's a compromise I'd still like to consider.
Then that is tough. But we are right now opening up, because we will be testing last. I'm saying we're opening up the community portion of it a little bit. I would like to see us tighten that stuff in the school. And I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure. I would do that.
Give the current status of last week's.
It was at 16%.
Both were at 16. I'm just wondering what the case was. The elementary was
70
higher
and
with less close contact. Just-
elementary was at 50. Elementary was at 63. And
16% at the elementary,
high school was at
16% at the
78.
middle high school.
63 and 78. 7 and 3.
positives,
Yes.
63 positive and close contacts at the elementary, and 78 positive close contacts at the middle high school.
So Joni, you're suggesting green is less than 10, yellow would be 10 to 15, and red would be greater than 15%.
I think that would be good, but wanted to open it up as a line item for discussion.
What were those numbers again, Dr. Burke?
Green would be less than 10%, yellow 10 to 15%, red would be greater than 15%.
Joni, I thought you said red was 10%.
I'm open to either. In my mind, with the exception of the 4Ks, the green and yellow are kind of one category. So whether the threshold is 10 or 15.
Andy, what do you think?
I think it's certainly something I would make. Yeah, we feel like- They are representing most of them.
Okay.
Okay.
What about a feedback mechanism to allow us to hear from the administrative team on a regular basis about, particularly when we move outside of red, their ability to ensure that the students who are close contacts are masking. We've operated under a everybody masking all the time culture since the beginning of the school year because we've been in that higher range. Hopefully we'll move out of that. We're asking the administration to enforce that, but I'd like to make sure we open that communication so that if they say it's a disaster, they can let us know and we're open to hearing that.
So we could put in another mechanism if you want, but my intent for the rest of the school year is to have a COVID plan update as a standing item on every agenda as informational. I don't plan on relitigating this plan every month as far as voting on it, but once we just make a decision here that we need an update monthly to say how are things going, and that would be a great question to ask at each meeting, depending on where we're at, But if you want something more than that, like a weekly email or images
I
updates
think
or
any update, if anything.
us or
This level of concern.
And obviously to let us know as soon as possible, but if they're really having a problem, let us know, it'd be ideal to know a week in advance. We can put it on the agenda, things are going in a bad direction. I just want to be able to react quickly, not 2 weeks after.
I agree with your point. For our visibility, I think it's an agenda item.
yeah.
Well, in a few states, North Carolina, a couple of them, they have to review it every month.
Okay, so we're going to keep it as is. Andy?
With the,
Effective.
With his recommendations, effective January 3rd.
You just call the question then? Okay.
Bush,
yes,
Eisner,
Andy, I don't think you need my vote to pass this, and given more time to think about it, I'd probably say yes. Moving away from the test to stay, I gotta say no. But I really appreciate your initiative to bring this for us. So I'm a no.
Metcalf,
No.
Gelding,
Yes.
Sullivan,
Yes.
Seafood,
Absolute compromise, yes.
done.
No.
But I do appreciate all the work, Andy.
So passes 4-3. Okay. Yeah, I just want to say, this board should feel very proud. Okay. And we've been talking ad nauseum about this thing for four meetings in the last month, several hours. And, you know, we don't all have the answers. And, you know, we didn't allow ourselves to be intimidated by a threatened lawsuit, but we paid attention and we listened to feedback. We got lots of emails, phone calls, and I think we heard everybody, you know, and I think a lot of opinions were represented, you know, opinions that say we should keep the plan as is, opinions that say we should keep masking, opinions that say we should repeal the whole plan, opinions that say we should get rid of all masking, opinions that say we should get rid of all testing, you know, frustrations with the protocol and kids being kept home multiple weeks. And, you know, we've heard all of that and we've been trying to come to a solution. And, you know, I know that someone can kind of, if people think that this board does not care about getting it right, then they're not paying attention. I just want to say that in public, in front of all of you, that you should feel very proud of. I know, and we have disagreed and we've been passionate, but everyone has treated each other well, and a lot of boards can't say that. Okay. What's next, Mitch? Are we going to? Well, we're going to the hires, right?
Correct. So you have, and I would say prior to going into closed session, I would be asking you to table letter A, part-time custodian. We had someone we were bringing forward tonight. Well, their current location has told them they will be working many hours of overtime through February. So they would not be available to us. We'll probably be trying to bring this back again once that goes away, but I would ask that we table letter A on that part-time custodian.
Sure. What is, how to word this? What's the stress level of the custodian staff without this hire, like right now?
Right now, it hasn't been bad, but it will get worse in a couple of days. We've had somebody who has been filling in and kind of giving us the temporary hours, those 4 hours. That individual will no longer be able to help us out. So I think when we come back from Christmas break, it will be extremely heavy.
And we don't have any snow.
Right, that's it.
Yeah.
Nobody's plowing.
It's gonna be.
Plowing or
one
shoveling
person
or anything.
all day when that happens. I get it.
And then we may have to do some juggling, and we have some full-time here that you might need to look at trying to split some of those hours, you know, and between the two buildings if we can't find any other solution.
Is it unprecedented to ask for like high school students to do part-time work, hourly work, like on a weekend or one night a week, or if some high school kids want to make a few extra bucks, is that unprecedented, or is it even legal for the school to hire its own students?
Extra credit gold stars?
Yeah.
We have students, we have high school students, former high school students that we employ in the summer to do a lot of custodial maintenance type jobs. So it would not be out of the question. And we can certainly throw it out there and see if we could find anybody that might be interested.
I mean, like you said, I mean, hopefully we'll hire someone in the next month or two, but you said it's going to get real tight with snow coming and all of that. I mean, obviously they can't plow snow during the day, but maybe there's some after school duties or something.
You know, it could be 3:30 to 7:30. Could
Yeah,
be
something very reasonable.
you know, if they need what, you know, we can work with the hours as to when they start and stop. But we can certainly explore that path and see if there's anybody out there that would be interested.
I think not paying them might be a problem.
So
Okay,
yes,
you need a motion to table that part.
yes, before even going into closed session, you could make a motion to table.
it to the next regular board meeting.
I would hope, yes.
I'll take a motion to table section 7(2)A on the part-time custodian.
I'll make that.
Anyway, regular meeting.
I'll make that motion.
You can do voice
All in
vote.
favor or?
Yeah. You can do
All in
voice
favor?
vote.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and say aye, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
And the other
You
two
wanna talk about
positions, the other two positions we have, we were able to find an RN that is available and could work in that 60-day window, could provide some hours of coverage for us. And we have a recommendation for a long-time substitute teaching position. And we can, if you have questions, we can cover that more in closed session.
Do we need the RN with the adaptation of the? what we just
It's certainly
passed?
something for you to consider.
We can talk about that and then we'll come out of closed session and we'll either to approve it or up or down vote. Okay. You want to say anything else before we go into closed session and talk about either of those candidates? Rich, how do you want to do this, Mitch? Do you want to go into closed session and then come out and then vote on that and then proceed to letter C?
I would do both.
You've given me the direction that anytime we have employee services positions that you want closed session so that
Yeah.
you can discuss that in closed session.
I think that's a good idea. I'm just trying to.
Right, so I would suggest we go into closed session, we can discuss them, and then we would come back out of closed session for you to take the final vote to either approve or deny that offer.
Okay, and then just for clarification, there were a couple other issues that the board wanted to discuss in closed session. Can we do two separate closed sessions in the same meeting? Like that?
Yes, you
Okay.
can.
We'll go into closed session, discuss the hires, come back and vote on the hires, and then we'll do a second closed session and the meeting.
Because the closed session is considering employment. So that's what you're doing. You're considering employment. And then you're also talking about performance or evaluation. So you can discuss.
Go into closed session twice or just do it once?
You can go into closed session one time and cover
Everything.
all of those things
Okay,
in that
that's
same
how you
closed
wanna do
session.
it? Okay,
Yes.
I'm fine with that.
So you need a motion, a second, and a roll call for closed session.
I make a motion that we move to closed session.
And roll call. We have Eisner and Schilling.
Eisner?
Yes.
Janetka?
Yes.
Sheldon?
Yes.
Sullivan?
Yes.
Seafood? Yes. Bush?
Yes.
Dunn?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone online.